In the dry winds that sweep across the Horn of Africa, a nation once full of promise found itself caught between dreams of unity and the burdens of clan, ideology, and ambition. This is the story of Somalia, a land born from hope, yet scarred by the very hands that built it. The year was 1969, and Somalia stood at a crossroads. Barely 9 years after independence, optimism was fading. Political corruption, tribal favoritism, and economic stagnation had begun to eat away at the young republic. The government of President Abdirashid Ali Shermark struggled to maintain order, and the democratic ideals of independence were giving way to clan rivalry and public frustration. Then, on October 15, 1969, everything changed. President Shermark was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards during a visit to the northern town of Las Anod. The nation fell into shock. For the first time since independence, there was no clear leader, and chaos loomed. Amid the confusion, a man in uniform stepped forward, Major General Mohammed Siad Barre, commander of the Somali National Army. On the morning of October 21, 1969, Siad Barre led a bloodless military coup, seizing power and dissolving parliament. The Supreme Revolutionary Council, SRC, was established, and Somalia's fragile democracy came to an abrupt end. But to many, Barre's takeover was not seen as tyranny, it was seen as salvation. He promised to sweep away corruption, end tribalism, and build a new, united Somalia under the banner of scientific socialism. Barre declared, "We are all Somalis. There shall be no clans, no tribes, only one nation." For a time, his words inspired millions. Barre's ideology was a unique blend of Marxism-Leninism and Somali nationalism. He called it scientific socialism adapted to Islamic values. The Soviet Union quickly became his key ally, supplying aid, weapons, and advisors. He launched an ambitious campaign to eradicate illiteracy, promote gender equality, and modernize agriculture. Under his rule, literacy rose dramatically, through a national program that took teachers to the remotest deserts and villages. The government banned clan-based politics, promoting slogans like "No clan in Islam" and "Socialism is the path to prosperity." Barre envisioned a Somalia where clan identity would vanish, replaced by national pride and socialist discipline. Roads were built, ports expanded, and Mogadishu began to resemble a modern capital. To outsiders, Somalia seemed to be transforming, a model African state guided by a strong, visionary leader. But beneath the surface, ancient rivalries simmered. Siad Barre's revolution demanded absolute loyalty. The SRC controlled every aspect of life, from the economy to the press. Political dissent was silenced. Barre's intelligence service, the National Security Service, NSS, became feared across the country. Those who questioned the regime were imprisoned, tortured, or disappeared. Clan favoritism, though banned in name, resurfaced in secret. Barre increasingly relied on his own Merhan clan, alongside the Ogaden and Dolbahant, forming what Somalis would later call the Mod Alliance. Opposition clans felt excluded. But to criticize Barre was to risk everything. Still, for many Somalis, daily life was improving, for now. Barre's ambitions did not stop at Somalia's borders. His dream was to unite all Somali-speaking peoples under one flag, a vision known as Greater Somalia. This dream burned fiercely. Across the borders in Ethiopia's Ogaden region, Djibouti, and northeastern Kenya, ethnic Somalis longed to join the motherland. Barre saw it as his historic duty to bring them home. But this vision would ignite one of the most disastrous wars in Somali history. By 1977, Somalia had become one of the most heavily armed nations in Africa, thanks to Soviet support. The timing seemed perfect. Ethiopia, under Emperor Haile Selassie, had collapsed into chaos following the 1974 revolution. The new Marxist Derg regime led by Mengistu Haile Mariam struggled to maintain control. Barre saw an opportunity. He believed Ethiopia was weak, a dying empire ripe for Somali liberation. In the summer of 1977, Somali regular troops, disguised as insurgents, crossed the border into Ethiopia's Ogaden region, sparking what became known as the Ogaden War. At first, victory seemed certain. Somali forces captured vast territories, and morale soared. The dream of Greater Somalia appeared within reach. But fate had other plans. In a stunning twist of Cold War politics, the Soviet Union switched sides, abandoning Somalia and supporting Ethiopia instead. With Cuban troops, Soviet advisors, and massive air support, the Ethiopians counterattacked. By March 1978, Somali forces were in full retreat. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed, and Barre's regime suffered its first major humiliation. The Ogaden War had shattered the illusion of invincibility, and with it, the foundation of Barre's rule began to crack. Back home, disillusionment spread. The once celebrated leader was now seen as reckless and power-hungry. Soldiers who returned from Ogaden told stories of betrayal, poor leadership, and needless loss. Clan divisions, once suppressed, began to re-emerge. Opposition movements started forming quietly, some in exile, others underground. The same man who promised to end tribalism had, unintentionally, sown the seeds of the coming storm. The 1970s ended not with triumph, but with tension. Siad Barre's revolution, once a beacon of hope, was now shadowed by repression, paranoia, and the ghosts of a failed war. As the 1980s dawned, Somalia would begin its slow descent from authoritarian order into chaos. The unity Barre built through fear would soon be tested, and ultimately, destroyed. The guns of the Ogaden had fallen silent, but Somalia was no longer the same. What had begun as a bold march for unity had ended in humiliation, betrayal, and the slow unraveling of a nation. The year was 1978, and the once celebrated regime of Siad Barre stood shaken. The failed Ogaden campaign had not only cost Somalia thousands of lives, it had shattered the myth of a powerful, united Somali state. The return of Somali troops from Ethiopia revealed the human cost of Barre's ambitions. Villages mourned their dead. Families waited endlessly for sons who would never return. Barre's government blamed the defeat on the Soviets and Cubans, but the people blamed Barre himself. The very man who promised a greater Somalia had led them into disaster. And within the Somali National Army, bitterness began to fester. In April 1978, just 1 month after the Ogaden withdrawal, a group of army officers, mostly from the Majertine clan, launched a coup attempt to remove Siad Barre from power. The coup failed, but it marked a turning point. Barre's retaliation was ruthless. Hundreds were executed, imprisoned, or exiled. The survivors fled across the border into Ethiopia, where they regrouped and formed the Somali Salvation Democratic Front, SSDF, the first organized armed opposition to the Somali government. It was the beginning of the rebellion. Barre's rule had once promised to eliminate clan divisions, but after the Ogaden disaster, he leaned increasingly on loyalty to his own clan alliance, the Maud Triangle, Merhan, Ogaden, Dolbahant. Government jobs, contracts, and military appointments were distributed along clan lines. Favoritism, once hidden, became institutional. Those outside Barre's circle, especially the Isaac, Hoi, and Majertine, were systematically marginalized. As resentment deepened, opposition movements took root across Somalia's regions. In the north, the Somali National Movement, SNM, was secretly formed by members of the Isaac clan in 1981. In the northeast, the SSDF continued its armed struggle from Ethiopian soil. In the central regions, whispers of rebellion began spreading among the Hoi. The once solid republic was splintering from within. By the early 1980s, Barre's scientific socialism had lost its ideological power. The Soviets were gone, and Western powers, particularly the United States, stepped in to fill the vacuum. In 1980, Somalia signed a military cooperation agreement with Washington. Barre reinvented himself as an anti-communist ally of the West in the Cold War chessboard. American aid poured in, weapons, funds, and diplomatic cover. But inside Somalia, the regime grew darker. The National Security Service, NSS, expanded its network of informants, prisons, and torture chambers. Fear became the language of governance. Ordinary citizens learned to whisper. A careless word against the government could mean disappearance. The once celebrated, revolutionary leader had turned into a paranoid dictator. The Ogaden War had drained Somalia's treasury. Combined with drought, mismanagement, and corruption, the economy entered a downward spiral. The Somali shilling lost value. Inflation soared. Rural communities, once the backbone of Somali society, suffered massive livestock losses from recurring droughts in 1979 and 1981. Barre's government relied heavily on foreign aid to survive, using it as a political weapon to reward loyal clans and punish dissenting ones. Urban centers like Mogadishu, Hargeisa, and Kismayo saw growing inequality. The elites grew richer, while the ordinary Somali faced hunger, joblessness, and despair. In a twist of irony, the same Ethiopia that Somalia had invaded now became a haven for Somali rebels. Mengistu's Marxist government offered sanctuary, training, and weapons to anti-Barre groups like the SSDF and SNM. What had once been a direct war between two states evolved into a proxy war fought through clan militias. Somalia's borders became porous battlefields. The countryside turned volatile, as government forces clashed with insurgents, and civilians were caught in between. Barre's army, once among Africa's strongest, became increasingly brutal, treating entire clans as enemies. In the northern city of Hargeisa, discontent simmered. The Isaac population, feeling excluded from national power, openly supported the SNM. In response, Barre unleashed collective punishment. Military raids, mass arrests, and extrajudicial killings became common. By 1983, Hargeisa had turned into a garrison city. Checkpoints dotted the streets, and the NSS ruled with an iron fist. But the regime's heavy hand only strengthened the resolve of the resistance. Between 1983 and 1986, Somalia lived under an uneasy calm, a silence filled with fear. Barre, aging and increasingly isolated, relied on family members to control key sectors of government. Corruption reached unprecedented levels. Schools deteriorated, hospitals lacked medicine, and government workers went unpaid. The people's faith in the revolution had long vanished. Behind the scenes, clan militias multiplied, waiting for their chance. By 1986, Siad Barre's health began to fail following a near-fatal car accident. For weeks, the nation wondered if he was dead. But he survived, frail, paranoid, and more determined than ever to crush opposition. His temporary absence exposed the power vacuum within his government. Rival factions, military officers, ministers, and relatives, jostled for influence. The balance of power shifted unpredictably. Somalia had entered a dangerous new phase, one where the ruler was too weak to lead, yet too powerful to be replaced. The dream of unity was long gone. In its place stood a country held together by fear, loyalty bought by favors, and peace maintained by the barrel of a gun. But the pressure was building, in the north, in the center, and in the hearts of the oppressed. The next explosion would not be a whisper of rebellion, it would be war. By the mid-1980s, the Somali state was rotting from within. The promises of unity and progress had given way to fear, factionalism, and blood. Siad Barre, once hailed as the father of modern Somalia, had become the symbol of its decay. The people whispered one word wherever they gathered, change, but in Barre's Somalia, that word could cost your life. In May 1986, Siad Barre's convoy crashed near Mogadishu. The president was severely injured, and for weeks, Somalia stood still. Rumors of his death spread through the country, and foreign embassies quietly prepared for the regime's collapse. But Barre survived. When he reappeared months later, frail and walking with difficulty, he declared himself stronger than ever. Behind the show of strength, however, his health and judgment were deteriorating. Power had become concentrated in a small inner circle, family members, loyal generals, and security chiefs. They ruled not through governance, but through terror. The Somali people could see it, The regime was dying, but it would not go quietly. In the northwestern regions, resentment had turned into rebellion. The Somali National Movement, SNM, composed largely of Isaaq clan fighters, had been growing in strength since its formation in 1981. By 1988, it was ready to strike. In May 1988, SNM forces launched a major offensive, capturing large parts of Hargeisa and Bureau. For a brief moment, the dream of liberation seemed possible. But Barre's response was swift and merciless. He ordered the Somali Air Force to bomb its own cities. For weeks, the skies over Hargeisa thundered with explosions. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. Civilians fleeing the city were strafed by gunfire from helicopter gunships. The United Nations later estimated that up to 50,000 people were killed. Others fled across the border into Ethiopia, hundreds of thousands of refugees escaping what many historians now call the Hargeisa Holocaust. The SNM was battered but not broken. Instead, the bombing campaign deepened hatred for Barre's government. What he hoped would crush the rebellion instead cemented his legacy as a butcher. While the north burned, the central and southern regions began to crumble as well. The Hoi clan, long excluded from power, grew restless. In Mogadishu and surrounding areas, frustration spread among officers and civilians alike. Meanwhile, the economy was in ruins. Inflation soared. Salaries went unpaid. Basic goods disappeared from markets. Foreign donors began to withdraw support, citing corruption and human rights abuses. Barre, desperate for cash, sold off state assets and borrowed heavily from Western creditors. Somalia, once seen as a Cold War ally, was now considered a failed client state. The streets of Mogadishu, once bustling with optimism, turned into a city of checkpoints and whispers. By 1989, two new rebel movements emerged to challenge Barre's rule in the south. The United Somali Congress, USC, formed mainly by the Hoi clan, led by figures like General Mohammed Farah Aidid and Ali Mahdi Mohammed. The Somali Patriotic Movement, SPM, composed mostly of Ogaden clan fighters from the south, many of whom were former allies of Barre but had turned against him. These groups gained momentum as government control weakened. The Somali army, once powerful and feared, was now fragmented by clan loyalties. Soldiers deserted in droves, taking their weapons with them. The government's authority began to collapse beyond Mogadishu. Roads became unsafe, militias controlled towns, and the central command structure disintegrated. In July 1989, government troops opened fire on a peaceful demonstration at Mogadishu's main cathedral, killing hundreds of civilians. The massacre shocked even Somalia's traditional allies. Human rights groups began documenting systematic atrocities, arbitrary arrests, torture, rape, and mass executions. The U.S. Congress froze most military aid, and international isolation deepened. For the first time, the Somali people began to believe that Barre could be overthrown. In the shadows of Mogadishu, young men whispered the unthinkable: the president must go. By 1990, the capital was surrounded by rebel forces. The USC advanced from the north and west, while SNM and SPM tightened their hold on regional strongholds. Clan militias formed everywhere, some seeking revenge, others fighting for survival. The Somali state was collapsing faster than anyone could imagine. Barre, cornered and defiant, vowed to fight to the last man. His speeches became delusional, filled with threats and paranoia. He dismissed the rebels as traitors funded by foreign enemies, but even his generals no longer believed him. The military, exhausted and unpaid, began to fracture. Commanders joined the rebels. Soldiers looted towns. Civilian life disintegrated into chaos. In December 1990, Mogadishu became a war zone. The USC launched its final assault. Street battles raged for weeks. Civilians fled as tanks rolled through narrow streets, and snipers turned rooftops into killing grounds. By January 26, 1991, Siad Barre's regime finally collapsed. The once mighty president fled Mogadishu in a convoy, heading west toward Ghetto with a handful of loyal soldiers. He left behind a capital in ruins, a government without leadership, a nation without direction. There was no peace, no transition, no successor. Only power vacuums and guns. Siad Barre's fall marked the end of an era, but not the end of Somalia's suffering. The dictator was gone, but the state he built on fear and clan manipulation had collapsed with him. In the void that followed, old rivalries erupted. The dream of democracy dissolved into a nightmare of warlords and vengeance. What came next would plunge Somalia into one of the darkest chapters in modern African history, a civil war without end. January 1991, the dictator had fled, but Somalia did not awaken to freedom. Instead, the gates of anarchy swung open. The fall of Siad Barre, long awaited and bloody, did not unite the Somali people. It shattered what little was left of the state. The capital, Mogadishu, once called the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, became the epicenter of destruction. Government ministries were looted, banks emptied, and neighborhoods divided by clan and militia. In the streets, the national flag still fluttered, but there was no nation left to claim it. When Siad Barre fled, he left behind no successor, no transitional authority, and no functional army. The regime had collapsed without a plan for what came next. The rebel groups that toppled him, mainly the United Somali Congress, USC, the Somali National Movement, SNM, and the Somali Patriotic Movement, SPM, had fought for years under the banner of liberation. But once victory came, unity evaporated. In Mogadishu, the USC split almost immediately into rival factions. General Mohammed Farah aided, the military commander and war hero. Ali Mahdi Mohammed, a businessman and politician supported by elders and intellectuals. Both claimed leadership of the new Somalia. Beyond Mogadishu, the rest of Somalia splintered into fiefdoms. In the north, the Somali National Movement, SNM, declared the Republic of Somaliland in May 1991, a unilateral secession that sought peace and stability apart from the chaos of the south. Hargeisa and Bureau lay in ruins from years of war, but the people there chose reconciliation over revenge. In the south, however, the situation worsened. Rival clans clashed over ports, roads, and food supplies. The Somali Patriotic Movement, SPM, battled remnants of Barre's forces around Kismayo, while the Somali Democratic Movement, SDM, fought in the Bay and Bakool regions. By late 1991, Somalia had no functioning national institution left, not even a central bank or postal service. The state that once commanded Africa's strongest army had disintegrated into dozens of clan militias, each answering to its own warlord. While the new factions fought over Mogadishu, Siad Barre was not yet gone from the story. After fleeing the capital, he regrouped in the Ghetto region with loyal troops and clan militias, attempting to reclaim power. From his new base in Luk, he launched sporadic offensives toward Mogadishu, hoping to regain control. But his time had passed. By April 1992, his remaining forces were defeated near Bardera. The aging dictator fled once again, this time into exile in Nigeria, where he would die 4 years later, far from the country he once ruled with iron and fear. Back in Mogadishu, the power struggle between Aidid and Ali Mahdi intensified. The city split in two, divided by the Green Line, a scar of destruction running through the capital. Roads were blocked, aid convoys looted, and ordinary citizens trapped between shifting front lines. With no functioning infrastructure, food distribution collapsed. The countryside, already devastated by years of conflict, descended into famine. Crops were destroyed, herds stolen, and rural markets cut off from supply routes. By late 1991, hundreds of thousands of Somalis faced starvation. The international community, watching from afar, finally began to take notice. By early 1992, Somalia's humanitarian crisis had reached catastrophic levels. Entire villages emptied as families walked for days seeking food. Mothers buried children by the roadside, bodies lay uncollected in the sun. International media coverage, particularly from journalists who braved the chaos of Mogadishu, brought the tragedy to the world's attention. Shocking images of skeletal children and mass suffering flooded global television screens. Famine was no longer a silent killer, it became a global outcry. The United Nations estimated that over 300,000 Somalis died between 1991 and 1992, not just from hunger, but from the violence that made relief almost impossible. Aid organizations like the Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontieres tried to operate, but convoys were attacked by militias who saw food as a weapon of control. Starvation became a tool of power. In April 1992, the United Nations launched UNOSOMI, the United Nations operation in Somalia. Its mission was to deliver humanitarian aid and restore stability. But it faced immediate obstacles. The UN had no local partner government to work with, and the militias demanded payment or control of all aid. Mogadishu was too dangerous for unarmed personnel, and relief agencies had to negotiate daily with warlords to move food. To enforce order, the UN deployed a small peacekeeping force, barely 500 Pakistani troops. They were outnumbered and outgunned by Somali militias. It was clear that a much larger intervention would be needed to save the country from complete collapse. By the end of 1992, nearly half of Somalia's population had been displaced. Some fled to refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia, others wandered between warlord zones, searching for safety. Entire generations were growing up without schools, healthcare, or hope. Somalia, once an ambitious, educated nation, was now synonymous with starvation and chaos. And yet, in the midst of suffering, ordinary Somalis showed remarkable resilience. Communities organized their own informal markets and local councils. Clan elders held peace meetings under acacia trees, trying to stop the endless bloodshed. But every fragile truce was shattered by the roar of another gun truck. By the dawn of 1993, Somalia had become a symbol of humanitarian failure, a country torn apart by greed, pride, and vengeance. The fall of Mogadishu was not just the collapse of a city, it was the death of the Somali state itself. But out of that darkness, the world was about to step in, not out of politics, but out of pity. And in doing so, it would walk straight into the line of fire. In March 1993, Operation Restore Hope officially transitioned into UNOSOM II, a new UN mission with an expanded mandate to nation-build and enforce disarmament. But UNOSOM II inherited a complex battlefield. Warlords resented being told what to do. Aidid, in particular, refused to surrender his weapons or his power. On June 5, 1993, the fragile peace shattered. In a brutal ambush, Aidid's militia killed 24 Pakistani peacekeepers assigned to inspect a weapons depot. The United Nations immediately declared Aidid an outlaw. The United States joined the hunt to capture him. Somalia's humanitarian mission had just become a manhunt. Over the following months, US and UN forces conducted raids and airstrikes across Mogadishu, targeting Aidid's strongholds. Helicopters thundered over the skyline. Convoys of Humvees patrolled the rubble-strewn streets. Civilians were caught between the crossfire of an increasingly hostile occupation and defiant militias. The more the UN tried to capture Aidid, the more popular he became among Somalis, who saw him as a symbol of resistance against foreign interference. By late 1993, Mogadishu had once again descended into urban warfare. On October 3, 1993, the U.S. launched Operation Gothic Serpent, a mission to capture two of Aidid's top lieutenants. It was meant to last an hour. Instead, it became one of the most infamous battles in modern history. Two American Black Hawk helicopters were shot down by Somali militia using rocket-propelled grenades. The soldiers who survived the crashes were trapped in hostile territory for nearly 18 hours. Thousands of armed Somalis surrounded them, and street-by-street fighting erupted. When the shooting finally stopped, 18 American soldiers and hundreds of Somalis lay dead. The images of a slain U.S. soldier's body dragged through Mogadishu's streets stunned the world. The United States had gone to Somalia to end suffering, and now found itself bleeding in the same dust it came to save. Women continued to stand at the center of this rebirth. They led peace committees in local districts, launched microfinance cooperatives, and entered parliament in growing numbers. Figures like Fawzia Yusuf Adam, Somalia's first female foreign minister, had opened doors for a new generation of women determined to shape their nation's destiny. In markets, hospitals, and schools, women became the quiet force keeping Somalia's pulse steady, their leadership now recognized as vital to national recovery. Decades of war had left not only physical ruins, but emotional scars. The process of healing required more than rebuilding, it demanded forgiveness. Across the country, reconciliation forums brought together clans long divided by vengeance. Imams, elders, and youth leaders engaged in dialogue to mend old rifts. It was not easy, but it was happening. The new Somalia was learning that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice and understanding. By 2025, Somalia's youth were more connected to the world than ever before. Over 70% of the population was under 30, a generation fluent in both Somali and digital language. They created podcasts, films, and apps, telling their nation's story through code, camera, and creativity. From the Hargeisa Tech Summit to youth-led innovation labs in Mogadishu, the Somali digital economy began to attract global interest. It was a rebirth powered by Wi-Fi and willpower, a sign that the next Somali revolution would not be fought with guns, but with ideas. By late 2025, Somalia remained imperfect, but it was alive, determined, and proud. Markets buzzed. Children laughed where gunfire once echoed. And amid the ruins of the past, new foundations were being laid, not just of stone, but of hope. Somalia had not yet arrived, but it was on its way, walking, slowly but surely, toward a horizon shaped by its own hands. In the heart of the Horn of Africa, a nation once written off by history continues to defy it. Somalia's story is not a tragedy, it is a testament. A reminder that even the most broken societies can find strength in unity, faith, and purpose. The guns may fall silent, but the echoes of resilience will endure. For every Somali who refuses to give up, the future remains unwritten, and full of possibility.